All right, so at this point we have an actual Mongo database set up for our backend. And what this means is that we can now convert over our endpoints to use that database instead of this fake in-memory array thing that we've been using, which, as we've seen, gets reset whenever our server restarts. Okay, so we're going to convert over our endpoints, but before we do that, I want to show you a few things. The first thing I want to show you is how to make our server automatically restart whenever we make changes to one of our server files. Okay, you may have gotten tired already of typing out node source/server.js and hitting enter every time you want to actually see a change occur that you've made to the file. The way that we normally have our server restart automatically is by using a tool called NodeDaemon. Now, NodeDaemon is a package that we can install by saying npm install NodeDaemon. And it is spelled NodeDaemon. I know some people pronounce this differently, like no demon, Nodemon, right? Nodemon, some people pronounce it like. It doesn't really matter. The point is that this is something we can use to automatically restart our server for us when we make changes. Now, this is something that we'll only want to be using in development, so to avoid bloating our production code, we're going to add the save dev flag on the end of this and hit enter. And now that we have that package installed, the way that we can run our server and have it automatically restart when we make changes is by running the command npx NodeDaemon, and then the path to our file. So source/server.js and hit enter. And what you'll see, it'll tell you that NodeDaemon is starting up, right? And then you'll see server is listening on port 8080. Now the difference is, since we're using NodeDaemon, if we make some kind of change to our file, like, if we delete something and save it, you'll see that it says restarting due to changes, and it tells you starting node source server.js. And then we see server is listening on port 8080 again. So essentially, all NodeDaemon is just a tool that sits and watches, waits for file changes, and whenever that changes, it will automatically rerun our app for us. Okay, so I like using this tool a lot. Most Node developers do, because it just saves a lot of time and having to kill the server and restart it. So one other thing that I'm going to suggest that you do is, instead of just typing out this command every time to run your code, I'm going to suggest that you add a special script for it inside your backend's package.json file. So the way that this works is, all you have to do is, inside this scripts portion of your package.json, you're going to add another property. And the name of this property is basically whatever string you want to use to identify this command. So for running NodeDaemon, I usually use the script name of dev. Okay, I'll show you how to use that in just a minute. And for the value, all we have to do is tell npm what this string is a shortcut for. Okay, so if we want to have that be a shortcut for our NodeDaemon command, the way we can do that is we just say npx NodeDaemon source/server.js. And now what we can do is, instead of having to type that out every time, we can just say npm run dev, and that will automatically run this command for us without us having to type it all out. Now, this isn't that long of a command, but in general, dev scripts and other kinds of scripts that you might want to run in your terminal can get pretty long, so, being able to add scripts like this is very useful. All right, so now that we have NodeDaemon restarting our server automatically, the other thing I want to show you how to do here is I want to show you how to be able to import things the normal way inside Node.js, right? I pointed out earlier that in our front-end files, we're able to use import Axios from Axios, and when we export something, we're able to say either export default, or we can export named exports like we did in our components here by saying export const new to-do form. Now, the way that we make this possible inside a Node.js program, and just to show you beforehand what will happen if we try and do it without any changes, if we were to say import express from express, which is the equivalent of this const express equals require express thing, and import UUID from UUID, what we're going to get if we try and run our server, right? If we say npm run dev, we're going to see it says cannot use import statement outside a module. Now there are various ways to fix this, but my preferred way is using a tool called Babel, that is B-A-B-E-L. I prefer using this tool called Babel to basically do what's called transpile my code from one version of JavaScript to an older version of JavaScript that Node supports. Okay, so just to give you a brief idea of what's going to happen here, right? The code that we wrote here using require syntax, this is what Node needs to run currently. And there are other ways to make Node accept this more modern import syntax, but essentially when you create a new Node project, it's going to want you to use require like this. So what Babel does then is it allows us to write our code, right? It allows us to write our JS files using this more modern import-export syntax. And then it will actually transpile. Transpile just means that it converts the code from one syntax to another. It transpiles that to an older version of JavaScript that uses require. And this does take care of things besides import and export as well. So when we're working with MongoDB, for instance, we're going to want to use async and await syntax, right, in order to interface with the database, since those are somewhat lengthy transactions that take place. So we're going to want to use async and await, and that's something that Node also does not currently support by default. So Babel will also take care, if we write async await in our actual source code, it'll actually transpile that into basic promises that Node.js knows how to work with. And if you're not familiar with any of these terms, don't worry about it too much. Just know that we need Babel in order to be able to write the most modern JavaScript syntax possible and still have it work in the Node.js runtime. So anyway, this is what we'll be writing, right? This side, the most modern JavaScript syntax here, and this is what Node.js will actually be running. Okay, so in that way, Babel basically keeps both sides happy. So in order to use Babel, we're first going to have to install a few packages into our project. The first package we're going to install is going to be called Babel/core. The second one is going to be called Babel/node, and the third one is going to be called Babel/preset-env. Okay, so let's hit enter, and oops, actually, before we do that, let's say save dev, because these are development tools that we're going to be using here. You generally won't want Babel in production. So let's hit enter, and that will install those dependencies as development dependencies. And once that's finished, we can actually go and start using Babel. And the way that we do that, first of all, we have to add a new file into the root of our directory. And that file is going to be called .babelrc. And what this file is, it's basically where we tell Babel what presets we want it to use to transpile our code from one form to another. Now, fortunately for us, the specific features of Babel that we want are pretty standard, so the only preset we need is the preset env that we installed earlier. Okay, and the way that we specify this file is it's just a JSON object with a single property called presets, and this is an array, and into that array we're going to insert our Babel/preset-env thing that we installed earlier. Okay, so now that we have this Babelrc file, we should be good to run our application with this import syntax. And the way that we do that, it's a slightly more complicated command. We have to say npx babel-node. This is the Babel node package that we installed earlier. And then the path to our file. So we're going to say source/server.js. We're going to hit enter. And we should see that it says server is listening on port 8080, which means that our import syntax is now working and we can delete these things here. Okay, so the last thing we need to do, when we use this npx babel node source server.js thing, we're back to the same problem as before, where in order to make any changes occur, right, if we were to change this back, in order to make that change actually take effect, we have to restart it and rerun that command. Okay, so in other words, we're back to square one before we had node daemon. So in order to make node daemon and Babel node work together, all we have to do is change the command slightly. So here's what the command is going to look like. I'm going to type it out here, and then we'll change our script inside package.json. So we're going to say npx node daemon, and then we're going to use the -- exec flag. This basically allows us to pick a specific command that node daemon will execute instead of just using the node command by default. And that command is going to be npx babel-node source/server.js. Okay, so what we're doing is we're telling node daemon to watch our files, and when some kind of change occurs, run this command here. Okay, so we're going to rerun it. We're going to see that it's running our command that we specified and that it says server is listening on port 8080. Okay, now that is a long command, so I generally recommend putting it inside your package.json file. So we're going to replace this script in dev with npx node daemon blah, 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 blah. And one thing you can actually do, because inside scripts, the npx is kind of implicit, we don't have to add npx, so we can just remove that from there and shorten it a little bit to node daemon exec babel node source server.js. Okay, so let's restart it now and run it using that script. So we can just say npm run dev now, hit enter, and we see that our server is automatically running using Babel node and node daemon. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.